Namaste and welcome to another new and refreshing episode of Philosophy Cafe. And Cafe is becoming more interesting and fresh with time and ages. Today we have with us Dr. Bhanu Pratap. He's an assistant professor in the law department in Lucknow University. Before introducing him, I would like to say that Dr. Bhanu often connects with us, and his ideas and discussions are very critical and thought provoking. And Dr. Bhanu uh, is currently an assistant professor of law at the Faculty of Law, University of Lucknow. He has over 12 years of experience in teaching and research, spanning the areas of international law and legal philosophy. He has authored two books on international law, along with various research articles in international and national journals. His recent book, An Introduction to the International Court of Justice, which was published in 2022, was published by Thomson Reuters and was reviewed by the prestigious Indian Law Institute Journal of Law. He is a guest lecturer at Harrisstow State University and Levi's and Clark College in the USA, where he teaches American constitutional law. Dr. Bhanu will be speaking on the subliminal international law, reimagining cartography and sacred geography. His lecture aims to reimagine the idea of territory and cartography from the perspective of the sublime. Sovereignty, jurisdiction, and sources are well-known cognitive devices in international law. It is argued that the concept of the sublime should be viewed as a new cognitive device in international law. Instead of viewing customs, treaties, and legal personality as the basic architects of international law, his task proposes to show how the sublime influences international law through cartography and sacred geography. I warmly welcome you, sir, in our cafe. And your talk will be for 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll take questions from our audience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I thank Kuruom Institute for giving me this wonderful opportunity. So, and as always, many thanks to Professor Balram Singh for being the guiding light in the field of philosophy. So, without wasting any further time, I would just like to state that why I chose this particular topic. This is an ongoing project of mine. I presented certain aspects of it at Indian Society of International Law, and I just wanted to further the extent of this idea. So, why connect the idea of sublime and international law? International law is usually found in its sources, in customs, treaties, or the writings of the jurist. And the popular perception is that international law is something that has something to do with the Charter of United Nations. It has something to do with the idea of war, peace, human rights, and the problems of management of refugees, so on and so forth. But in recent times, there have been certain cognitive turns in international law that have to be taken into account. And these cognitive turns, what they're trying to do, they're trying to shift the focus of international law from its formal sources towards the people. The idea is that international law should be a part of popular consciousness. So international law should not be limited to customs and treaties and the formalized writings of international law. It should be a part of our popular consciousness, because international law morphs and changes our daily lives on a daily basis. So the idea is to make the cognition of international law more democratic. And therefore, I chose the idea of sublime, an emotion, an idea that is a part of our human psyche, and can that be used to assess the idea of international law? Now, as far as the recent cognitive turns in international law are concerned, I would like to point out the works of Jesse Homan and Daniel Joyce, who have written an excellent book called International Law and Objects, and where they have argued that objects go on to create the cognition of international law. Then you have the wonderful work of Valentine Huttner, who has just he was in the process of creating a museum of international law, where he is training his students to understand international law through objects such as helmets, passports, the skulls of the victims of genocide. And then you have the work of Anne Saab, who is working on a project called Emotions and International Law, where her work primarily focuses on emotions such as fear, awe, surprise, and its relation with environmental law and international humanitarian law. So it is in this context that I'm trying to relate the idea of sublime and international law. Now, I interpret international law to be a spatial phenomena, something that has to do with space. That is why we talk about territory, sovereignty. Now, what were to happen if we combine the idea of a spatiality, space, with cartography and use sublime as a philosophical grounding? So, can it be said that the idea of sublime provided a philosophical grounding for cartography, and cartography went on to create a very specific Eurocentric understanding of international law, which was primarily based on speciality, territory, and jurisdiction, which made Earth an ascertainable phenomena, and that went on to create the narrative of colonialism. And how did the colonized people, the natives, were they able to use the emotion of sublime to counter the narrative of their colonizers? Now, as far as the idea of sublime is concerned, it has had a very rich history in aesthetics, in arts, in paintings, and right from Longinus to Burke, Kant, they have the sublime has had a very rich history. But when sublime is placed in the hands of the critical theorist, they go on to make sublime a source of popular cognition, something that the people can use to counter a hegemon, and it can be used as a tools of justice. So now, what exactly is the sublime? Sublime has been interpreted by so many authors in so many ways. It can be interpreted as a phenomena that expands our consciousness without distorting it. I think the first recorded treatise on sublime is by Longinus, who interpreted it as a linguistic event, something that merges the writer and the reader, something that produces the emotion of ravishment, or something that knocks the reader, something that completely knocks out the reader. That is a subliminal experience. It disrupts our everyday consciousness. It produces hypsos, a state of transport and exaltation, where the viewer or the audience are transported to a world of awe and strangeness. It is an aspect where we experience loss of control. Sublime is responsible for producing ecstasy in our mind. It is responsible for the feelings of wonder and astonishment. And it is something that is primarily related to, in Longinus' words, it is related to the drama of power and struggle for possession. Now, in, in Greek grammar, the word sublime was substituted for hypsos, something that was related to the meaning of height, high from above, upwards, high up, aloft, elevated, a towering figure, so on and so forth. Interestingly, Longinus says that sublime is something that is related to threshold or an elevated height. Now, when sublime was interpreted by 18th and 19th century philosophers such as Burke and Kant, then sublime became the power of the mind to soar above certain obstacles of sensibility by means of moral principles. That's the case of Immanuel Kant, who combines sublime with his morality. And if viewed from the perspective of Immanuel Kant and Edmund Burke, sublime is a cognitive device that is a part of human consciousness. Now, in the 18th century, it is Mendelssohn's work that provides the ground for Kantian understanding of sublime. Now, Mendelssohn divided beauty and sublime. So beauty is something that has definite boundaries, and since it has boundary, you cannot overstep it. Sublime is something that is gigantic, enormous, and is essentially formless. Mendelssohn classified sublime into two parts based on the immensity of magnitude or size and on immensity of strength. This classification became the ground for Kantian classification of sublime into mathematical and dynamical form. Now, as far as immensity of magnitude or size is concerned, it is primarily concerned with vast seas, plains, legions of stars, height, and depth. So primarily it has something to do with physical space. When we talk about sublime in terms of strength, we talk about power, the power to experience genius and virtues. Mendelssohn further says that sublime can be objective and subjective at the same time. So objective sublime is something that is original in nature, that is something original and lies in nature. And subjective sublime is the perspective of the viewer or the artist. Mendelssohn was particular about locating sublime in nature. And of course, the trend is reversed by Immanuel Kant, who was of the view that sublime is something that cannot be found in art galleries, but in nature. Now, Mendelssohn further argued that a subliminal mind can only produce a state of stupor or an absence of consciousness. Sublime is something that is responsible for emptying our mind, something that makes people wonder, something that makes people think, something that is necessarily a limitation on the faculties of understanding and imagination. Now, Kant addressed the issue of sublime in his pre-critical phase and in his critical phase as well. Now, in the pre-critical phase, there are two works that deal with the idea of sublime. They are Observations on the Failures of the Beautiful and Sublime and his Lectures on Anthropology. And as all of us are aware, in his critical phase, he touched upon the idea of sublime in the Critique of Judgment. Now, as far as Kant is concerned, Kant interprets sublime in a different manner. He goes on to classify sublime into various categories. He talks about the terrifying sublime, talks about noble sublime, and he talks about a magnificent sublime. So as far as the first category is concerned, that is terrifying sublime, it talks about our perception or our sight of vast deserts, loneliness, wastelands, or the idea of infinity. So, and as far as noble sublime is concerned, it is concerned with the very idea of greatness. And when we talk about magnificent sublime, we are primarily dealing with the idea of grandeur. I mean, grandeur when you come across a beautiful church or a beautiful temple, so you feel a sense of grandeur. So that is Kantian idea of magnificent sublime. Now, as far as the Kantian understanding is concerned, Kant was of the view that in order to experience the very feeling of sublime, there are three requisites. Number one, sublime is something that you observe from a safe distance. So if you are watching the news of World Trade Center falling, then you're watching it on television. You are at a safe distance. Therefore, you are experiencing the feeling of sublime. But the people who died in those attacks, they were not in a position to experience sublime because they were already running for their lives. And second is an awe-inspiring greatness. And thirdly, sublime is something that acts as a counterweight to beautiful, something that does not have a form, something that allows us to think deeper. Now, Kant further said that both the idea of beautiful and sublime are reflective judgments, um, something that has an aesthetic value, and something that cannot be verified through logical means. In other words, when we are dealing with the idea of sublime, it is only in sublime or in an aesthetic judgment that the human mind is completely free. When we are reasoning, when we are talking about logic, our mind is constrained by the axioms or the dictates of logic. But the same thing does not happen when we are experiencing an aesthetic judgment like sublime. We are free to think, we are free to imagine. So, in essence, in the Kantian terminology, sublime deals with the idea of magnanimity and formlessness. And since sublime is about formlessness, it forms a ceiling on imagination. And further, he argues that sublime can be overcome by the employment of reason. Now, the most famous Kantian classification of sublime is mathematical sublime and dynamic sublime. So when we are talking about the idea of mathematical sublime, I'll just be very precise. Mathematical sublime is something that is physical in nature when we imagine the idea of infinity. When a physical phenomena is so vast that the only way to cognize it, the only way to interpret it is through the idea of infinity. For example, space or universe. We do not have an exact idea about the vastness of space. Therefore, the human mind creates the very idea of infinity. So it is mathematical sublime is something that is dealing with the objects that are external to us. So in other way, it is a capacity to assess the totality of a physical structure. That's the essence of human mind. We tend to make an assumption of the totality of something. But when we talk about the dynamic sublime is different. It is something that awakens practical reasoning. Dynamic sublime is attracted when we feel physically small. We have a tendency to be in a safe place wherever we want to avert ourselves from storms or lightning. And being in a safe place is important for dynamic sublime. So this is something that is more social in nature, whereas the idea of dynamic sublime, the mathematical sublime, I'm sorry, the mathematical sublime is purely mathematical and physical in nature. So Kant again, he went on to interpret sublime from the idea of idealism. So he said that sublime is something that lies in human consciousness and not in the object itself. Objects do not are not sublime in themselves. It is human consciousness that attributes the physical, the property of sublime to these objects. Now, as far as the Kantian perception of sublime is concerned, it played a pivotal role in the development of reason. Kant essentially argued that sublime was something that was a ceiling on imagination, and ceiling is since imagination is prohibited by sublime, therefore reason comes to the rescue, and reason can be used as a device to overcome the sublime. Humans use it to transgress or to overpower the natural boundaries that nature poses on them. For example, if we take example of dynamic sublime, if we are in the awe of nature, if we are awe in the forces of nature, then we create cartographic devices. Then if it's raining, we created an idea of umbrella, because reason compels us to transgress these physical limitations on us. So as far as the idea of reason is concerned, it is very important that humans are not overwhelmed by the natural forces. We tend to overcome it. And Kant also argues that as far as sublime is concerned, it becomes a part of our morality too. So, for example, if you see Verne's paintings, where there's a shipwreck. So there's a painting of the shipwreck by Verne where people have been shipwrecked and there's a storm coming, there's a sea storm coming. But even in that subliminal moment, even in that moment of sublime, people are trying to rescue each other. So even in the moments of sublime, people are performing their moral duties. So the rational or the reasonable idea tends to overcome the idea of the mathematical sublime as well as the dynamic sublime. Now, as far as uh, dynamic sublime is concerned, it is directly connected to human morality and the problem of presentation. Dynamic sublime is connected to our idea of freedom, and it allows human morality to trump over nature. And again, it is yet another example of human will transcending over the nature. And it is this sense of transcendence that allows us to subvert the magnitude of nature. Now, it can be said that the morality driven sublime allows human freedom to access those areas of nature which were otherwise inaccessible. And because of the transcendent nature of human freedom, the might of nature has no dominance over the humans. And that is why humans are in a position to create the idea of cartography, where we challenge the waves, where we challenge the stormy seas, where we challenge the idea of infinite and create territories for us. Now, as far as the idea of sublime is concerned, uh, the idea of sublime now has a very different narrative as far as critical philosophy is concerned. Now, the idea of sublime, when placed in the hands of the critical theorist, it assumes a new language. The critical theorists use sublime to challenge the idea of a hegemon, to challenge the idea of universality, and they use it as a tool of justice because sublime is something that is situated in the consciousness of the people. And sublime, the critical theorists argue, it can be used to challenge the narratives, to challenge the idea of meta narratives. It can be used to challenge the established political structure, and it can be used as a tool of justice. So, sublime, when used by the critical theorists, it can be used when there is an immense challenge for our sublime crops of when there is an immense challenge to our experience, and it adds to the contents of critical thinking, right? And while talking about critical thinking, it can be said that reasoning is the biggest gift that has been conferred on humans, and the reasoning mind is greater than anything that nature can dish out at humans. Now, as far as the critical theorists are concerned, I cite the work of Rancière and Lyotard. Rancière was of the view that sublime directs our senses to the idea of plurality, a world of competing worlds, where politics is something that needs constant negotiation, something that is in dire needs of alterity and the understanding of the other. This work is done by the sublime. Uh, a sublime understanding of the world with narratives and auto-ethnographic narratives opens up the audience to the wonders and horrors of the world. This is the observation of Dean Cavano in her work, The Sublime of the Political Narrative. So, sublime is not merely a device of human cognition, it is also a political device that can be used to challenge narratives. Uh, Matthew Legard argues that the sublime has a political narrative, and it is something that usually defies definition but can be used to interpret nostalgic politics. Nostalgic politics that has been doing rounds since the election of Donald Trump. So nostalgic politics is something that someone is able to win elections by appealing to the past of the nations. And again, uh, sublime, according to the critical theorist, is subject to cultural, technological, and individual changes. The and emotions, images and emotions produced by terror are aspects of sublime. So whenever we are witnessing an attack on a country, or whenever we are witnessing a terrorist attack, we are invoking the sublime within us. So sublime is not something that is used solely for the purpose of cognition. It can be used to create political and legal narratives. Uh, Sublime, as when viewed from the perspective of critical philosophy, it is an intervention into the stabilized form of our psychic lives. It is something that allows us to experience awe. It is something that allows us to be wondrous in times of injustice. In other words, it is an sublime is also an aspect of existentialist crisis. Uh, Another brilliant contemporary thinker on sublime is Jean Ray. She calls sublime as a collective mourning where people feel a desire for truth, where people feel a desire for justice, right? And sublime can be used to change the political narrative. She further calls sublime a wild collective psychoanalysis, right? And the focus of the political sublime is the big other. And she criticizes the Enlightenment understanding of sublime, where sublime was used to create definite categories of cognition. So sublime is something that can be used for aesthetic. She said that is not the sole job of sublime. It can be used to create something more democratic in times of crisis. Now, as far as the idea of sublime is concerned, it has been used to interpret the idea of speciality. When Kant employed reason to interpret the idea of sublime, or something, a faculty that is used to overcome sublime, it has been used in the, it can be argued that sublime has been used in the creation of cartographic, or to create a linear spatial understanding of the world. And if we now analyze international law from the perspective of sublime, then international law is primarily a spatial phenomena, where we talk about territories, and through territories we talk about sovereignty and jurisdiction, we talk about delimitation, we talk about boundaries. So international law is primarily a spatial phenomena, and this spatial phenomena was created primarily through the idea of cartography and borders. The idea of cartography and borders was championed by the Europeans, and the cartographic view of the world was superimposed upon the colonized, upon the Asian, African narratives. So, if we were to say that the present understanding of international law is very Eurocentric, it is Eurocentric because what we are experiencing, or what the way we have developed international law, is through a European lens, which is primarily spatial in nature, which views territory as a manageable entity, something that can be managed through creating borders, something that can be located through maps, something that can be ascertained through mathematical accuracy. And it is in this context that the idea of cartography and spatiality can be viewed from the idea of sublime. Now, if you are to interpret spatiality from the point of view of modernism, especially from the temporal time period of Renaissance Enlightenment, then modern understanding of spatiality is a cultural practice that aims at understanding and explaining the natural world through control. So the modern idea of speciality is cartography, which tends to manage or control the natural world. Again, a specific application of Kantian's sublime. Nature is something that can be overcome by the employment of human reason. So maps or cartography in the modern urban space, it is a part of a legally mandated procedure that converts a specific parcel of land into discrete lots that can be managed, or something on which sovereignty can be asserted. And legal and spatial management through cartography cannot be divorced from the idea of private property. So what the subject that is now known as international law is primarily a cartographic, spatial, and proprietary phenomena that views the world in terms of territory, ownership, and possession. So, and that's a very colonial thing to do. I mean, before the advent of colonialism, the indigenous culture did not view the world in terms of property, right? So, and it is in this sense that the idea of sacred geography comes in. So as far as the Indian legal philosophy is concerned, there was very little speculation on the idea of private property, where man stands as a possessor of his proprietary idea. So the idea of ownership and possession were engineered by the Romans, and the similar narrative cannot be found in the Europeans' idea. Now, in recent times, there have been certain cartographic thinkers who have adopted a critical approach. One of them is Jeremy Crompton. Now, Jeremy Crompton has explicitly stated in his work, Mapping a Critical Introduction, that the idea of mapping and objects cannot be divorced from the idea of imperialism. And he says that cartography is not just a neutral science. Behind the facade of this neutral science lies a facade of European hegemony, where maps have been used to oppress, subjugate, or subject the indigenous population to the European control. And there's this brilliant analysis of European cartography, which says that movement was something that was exclusive to the Europeans. And the indigenous and Pacific population primarily remained stationary. Now, that means since Europeans had mastered the idea of navigation and cartography, they were the one who were monopolizing the idea of movement throughout the world. So they went into the seas, they explored, they acquired new territories, they conquered the new worlds, whereas the natives remained stationary and they just waited to be colonized. So that's the popular narrative. And Crompton says that when we say critical understanding of cartography, we are primarily finding new ways to imagine the given idea. So critical thinking is primarily methods to challenge the given concepts, to explore the politics or to explore the hegemony behind the supposed neutral concepts, how things were ordered, and for whose benefit. So this is something that the critical philosophy is trying to do, and this is how the critical lens reinterprets the idea of sublime and cartography. So the critical method is not saying that knowledge is not true, but that the truth of knowledge is established under certain political conditions. So we are to explore those political conditions. In other words, when viewed through the critical lens, and when we view the idea of sublime and cartography through the critical lens, then it says that technology are always pregnant with the idea of subversion. Power imbalance will always be there. right? And the surveying of land and the acquisition of land is primarily a cartographic notion that is based on subjugation. And that is why international law has also been known through another term called cartographic violence. So the neutral idea that we know that we now know as international law in forms of treaties, so on, that is actually cartographic violence, something that has been an aspect of European subjugation. Now, as far as the idea of speciality is concerned, critical theorists now view that speciality is not something merely physical or administrative in nature. Critical theorists, particularly Westphal, Adorno, Horkheimer, and in recent times, if we explore the works of Henry Lefebvre, I hope I got the pronunciation right, they are of the view that after 20th century, that is in the post-1945 world, what has emerged is speciality. What the 18th and 19th narrative of enlightenment did, it it gave precedence to temporality over spatiality. That means time was more important than space, because time signified the idea of progress. Or in other words, temporality was used by the capitalists to further the idea of progress. So time is always something that is moving forward in linear spaces, something that signifies the idea of progress. So the Enlightenment or the modern world was so obsessed with the idea of temporality, they forgot about spatiality. And in post 1945 world, spatiality gained a social quotient. So when we are talking about spaces, we are talking about actual people who have faced problems. So when we are talking about spatiality in the post second world, in post World War II order, we are talking about concentration camps. We are talking about the problems of the refugees, right? We are talking about people who are still being colonized. So when we are talking about concentration camps, when we are talking about the refugee crisis, we are not obsessed with the idea of temporality. Our focus has shifted towards spatiality. So space is not merely a physical, cognitive, scientific, or a phenomena of the category in an Aristotelian Kantian fashion. Space is something that is very much a social reality. It is dealing with people. And uh, when we are talking about the social aspect of spatiality, we are talking about organization of space that is central to the social structure. And Henry Lefebvre has said that space was an ideological, is an ideological, lived, and subjective idea, something that is felt by people on a daily basis. When we talk about urban spaces, when we talk about poverty, when we talk about the homeless, we are dealing with the social quotient of spatiality. So, spatiality is not to be interpreted through the lens of Descartes or through the lens of Kant or through the lens of Aristotle, who were primarily concerned with the scientific and cognitive aspects of speciality. That means speciality is something that is used for the realization of knowledge. Speciality itself is a social phenomena that has social consequences. And when we interpret a speciality from the social context, and after having established cartography as a specific application of the post-sublime phenomena, I now turn my focus towards the idea of something that is known as sacred geography. Now, sacred geography is something that was experienced not by the colonizer, but the colonized. And the colonized in our context are the people of India. Particularly, I choose the city of Calcutta because Calcutta has had a very rich history with imperialism. It experienced colonialism, voices of colonialism, and anti colonialism narratives at the same time. So, the critical method has always been very strong in the city of Calcutta. And sacred geography is something that interpreted imperialism as a sublime experience. Because imperialism is not merely about subjugation, it's not something about the usurpation of your sovereignty or the taking away of your land. Imperialism as a sublime is a sublime experience because it challenged the cognitive structure of the Indians. They were in awe of the idea of imperialism. With one swift stroke, the indigenous understanding of law, of sovereignty was displaced by the Westphalian world order. I mean, even if we take a cursory look at the legal syllabus, we are taught the idea of sovereignty, but we are not taught the conceptual basis of samprabhuta. And samprabhuta is an inaccurate translation of sovereignty. So if we equate samprabhuta with sovereignty, then we can say that translation is doing great disservice to the indigenous idea of samprabhuta. So the idea of samprabhuta was displaced by sovereignty. Uh, the indigenous legal system was overshadowed or eclipsed by the common law system. So imperialism is not something that happened that can be used to signify the change of power. It had a deeper societal effect. It directly impacted the psyche of the Indians. So imperialism allowed the colonized or the people of India to be in a state of awe, wonder, and most importantly, to be in a state of terror. Because it took us quite some time to understand this European narrative which was imposed upon us. So if we are to interpret the idea of sacred geography, I think the best method is to invoke the ideas of Edmund Burke. And when Edmund Burke, who coined the phrase delightful horror, I think Burke is a better lens to understand the idea of sacred geography and the experience of the colonized. So when Burke used the phrase delightful horror, it is primarily a confrontation with mortality, limitation, and ruins, right? And it is concerned with the passionate nature of human being, and the sublime is connected to pain, solitude, self preservation, and fear. And I think the colonized people are experiencing all these emotions together. So they are experiencing pain, they are experiencing fear, but at the same time, they have a very strong sense of self preservation. The Burkean sublime is concerned with the politics of hierarchy, which addresses the ordering and vitalization of human life. Now, it is in this context that we have to understand the idea of sacred geography. Now, the idea of sacred geography is trying to counter the cartographic understanding of the world. It is trying to counter the mathematical and ordered European view of the world. So when we are talking about sacred geography, uh, the idea is that some thinkers, primarily from Kolkata, and I would like to cite the works. I don't have enough time because otherwise I would have discussed the works of Binoy Sarkar. So Binoy Sarkar, and even if we look at the work of Bankim Chandra Upadhyay, and particularly if we look at the paintings of Abanindra Tagore. So Binoy Sarkar and Abanindra Tagore, they are invoking sacred geography, particularly Abanindra Tagore, because through the paintings of Bharat Mata, they are the elites of the Bhadralok of Calcutta are trying to do. They're trying to offer a counter narrative to European sovereignty. So, sacred geography is something which realizes a political order not through violent cartographic means, but through the idea of symbolism. Something that imagines polity in sacral form, something that bases politics on religion. And that is why I interpreted Indian polity as a post-secular phenomena where there is no complete separation between politics and religion. And that's exactly what sacred geography tried to do. Recently, if we explore Caleb Simmons' work, the name of his book is Devotional Sovereignty, where he argues that Samprabhuta is different from sovereignty. Sovereignty is primarily a cartographic mathematical formula that is based on the idea of ownership and possession, hence helping the cause of the European colonialism. But sacred geography or Samprabhuta is something different. It is a sacred order where people are trying to realize their indigenous sovereignty through religious means, through the ideas of symbolism. And when you make a symbolic order, when you create the idea of Bharat Mata, when you create symbolic orders through paintings or through the idea of Chitramanta, the paintings, the temple paintings that you find all over South India, then you are trying to create your own narrative, a narrative that is not primarily based on the European order. You're trying to rescue your indigenous narration from the proprietary nature of European sovereignty. So, sacred geography is something that counters the idea of cartography. And when we talk about sacred geography, we talk about the paintings of Bharat Mata, and we also talk about the idea of pilgrimage. So, pilgrimage was primarily a symbolic order, a sacral cognitive way to realize the idea of Indian territory. Something that was not based on subjugation of the people, something that was not based on proprietary system. So I think it is in this context that I tried to connect the idea of sublime with international law through the lens of Burke, Khan, through the lens of the critical theorist, and I tried to connect the idea of speciality and cartography with it. So it is it's still an ongoing project, so I don't know whether I made any sense at all, but that was my discussion on supply.
Thank you so very much, sir, for this wonderful talk. And we have many great scholars and academicians here. Uh,
Right.
Dr. Raj, please go ahead with your question. Raj, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bhanu.
Thank you, sir.
So, normally you talked about sublime, and normally the positive pleasure of beauty you talked about. So, which is normally generally it's very immediate and harmonious. So, but the negative pleasure, which is normally characterized by vibration of both being repelled and being attracted. So in that case, why do we have to we derive from objects that cause initial displeasure, pain, or fear? Because initial
Right.
displeasure and pain, uh, uh, um, after that, there is a complex satisfaction that also arises. Please comment on that.
Right. I think, like I already discussed, I'm primarily not from philosophy background, but I think this was answered by Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy, where he speculates on the idea that why are humans obsessed with the idea of ugliness or something that does not conform to the idea of beauty. Maybe that's another method to overcome the present value system. Or if we interpret from the perspective of critical thinkers, particularly Lyotard and Rancière, who now argue that the idea of beauty is dead. It's not beauty that orders the political, it is sublime. Because in real life, you feel pain, you feel terror, you feel a sense of injustice. That's the reality of life. So the idea of beauty has now been replaced by the reality of life, which is primarily sublime in nature. So it is in that sense that sublime is a better cognitive device to understand the world around us. I mean, for example, let's take a view at our televisions right now. What we are witnessing are missile attacks, or whether Trump is right, or whether Iran is right. We are witnessing we are witnessing the problem of Gaza, where I think that's a genocide that's streaming online. So in this context, I think sublime is more appealing than the idea of beauty, and that's how postmodern art legitimizes itself. That is why the idea is that paintings usually do not conform to the idea of a perfect shape, of something that you see in Renaissance paintings, or something that you see in Caravaggio's work. So that is not way art is interpreted these days. So usually everything there is to challenge the established system, to connect everything to the society. So therefore, sublime is not something that is limited to art galleries or to universities. It should be a part of popular consciousness.
So if someone is jealous and he has pain because of the jealousy, and after sometimes when he got uh, some negative, means whatever he is jealous about, he gets satisfaction for that. That is called sublime or not?
I think it's obvious to get jealous at some time, but sublime is to be used as a tool of self-reflection.
Okay.
Something that you can do
So
to make yourself better, or right.
Yeah, is it
Yes.
then, is it universal? Does everyone feel the sublime in the same way, or does it require a certain level of
Right.
cultural or
No, that's a
educational
good
or
that's a good question. Uh, sub I think all of us experience sublime, but I don't think some people are aware of the word sublime, or they have a better understanding of the word sublime. So if we read the word of, again I'm citing Lyotard or even Kant or Nietzsche, all of them agreed that sublime is very much dependent on the moral structure of your society. So if you read more, if you understand more, if you are able to evaluate the surroundings in a more sensible fashion, you will be able to cultivate the idea of sublime. So the idea of sublime is very much dependent on the level of education that you have, how sensible you are to the outer world, how critical you are of the outer world, and whether your culture supports the idea of sublime. So if you're living in an environment that does not support critical thinking, so I don't think you will be able to assess speciality as a sublime phenomenon.
okay? So one last question, or maybe little bit a comment for discussion. Uh, like for example, if I am seeing a modern art, if I am
Right,
not understanding the modern art,
right.
and because of if I start applying my intellect and my emotional engagements on towards
Hmm,
that
hmm,
particular
hmm,
picture
hmm.
or frame, then
Right.
then I got to understand, and then that will be considered as a that pleasure which we am getting after understanding some of the things of that particular art, that is considered
Hmm.
as a sublime.
Yeah, that's again a very interesting question. Now, I mean, again, sublime as it is a part of aesthetics, so it's very personal, right? So what I'm saying is very personal to me. It's very subjective to me. I don't think I can give a very objective answer to that. But as far as art galleries are concerned, the moment you enter an art gallery, you are supposed to feel the idea of sublime. And as far as modern art is concerned, modern art is a deliberate attempt to defy the idea of form and substance. So modern art believes that if you see a well-sculpted woman or a well-sculpted male body, and if you're able to replicate the same thing in form of a statue, that's not art. Because according to the critical theorist, art is something that compels you to think that representation is not possible. The very idea of arriving at a singular meaning is not possible. The idea is to attract alterity. The idea is to understand that there are various meanings. There is meaning of meaning. So the very idea of art is to frustrate you by portraying that there is no form. In fact, the painting, which has its edges, it cannot encapsulate reality in those edges or in those frame. That is why modern art is different. So you might be repulsed by it. You might be able to attract a feeling of sublime, or you might feel completely rejected and just walk out of the gallery. Now, since sublime being in part of aesthetic judgment, it's very subjective, it's very democratic. So people may interpret it from a different way, but that's my understanding of modern art.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have another question from Alok Tandon, sir. Sir, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shipra. I am not a scholar like Bhanu, and thank you
Yes.
very much, Bhanu, for this
सर
scholarly
कल मॉर्निंग में आपसे मिलेंगे.
presentation. What
Hello.
international law today?
Right, sir. Hello. Sir, I think
That the whole
I missed a part of your question. Could you repeat it?
सर अपना वीडियो बंद करके बोलें तो फिर आवाज आ जाएगी यार, नेटवर्क इशू है आपकी.
failure after
Alok, sir.
of sublime and all that. It is just a brutal or justification of that. And another question that comes to my mind, and that seems to me a little more problematic, that after the experience of this whole colonization and acceptance of the Eurocentric categories, how you look at the future of the this sacred geography, especially in India, and especially in the context where religion and politics are being mixed for the purpose of some sort of what can say nostalgic politics. So, is it not very, very dangerous to attempt for that alternative of that Eurocentric view of looking at the things? Thank you.
So I think I missed the first part of your question. I heard the second part though. So as far as the future of sacred geography is concerned, I mean, if we talk about formal international law that interprets the legal order in terms of custom treaties, I think that has done an irreversible damage to the international legal order. We can criticize the idea of Westphalian sovereignty, we can criticize its proprietary nature, but even as we speak today, right, I don't think there is any conceptual alternative to Westphalian sovereignty. No one is saying that it's the perfect system. It's not. But I think it's the only workable situation that we have. The thing that we can do is to improve upon the idea of Westphalian sovereignty. And I'll give you an example. For a very long period of time, sovereignty was usually interpreted as the right of the state. Right? So, I am sovereign. So, I am a state. I am sovereign. Therefore, I have the right to go to war. But recently, in 21st century, a new nomenclature has been added, something that is now known as sovereignty as responsibility. It says that sovereignty is not the exclusive narration of state. It is something that is experienced by the people. So, sovereignty is no longer the right of the state. It is the responsibility of the state. And possessing sovereignty does not mean that you can go to war whenever you want to. Having sovereignty does not mean that you can commit acts of genocide. Having sovereignty does not mean that you can commit ethnic cleansing or war crimes, so on and so forth. So, as far as sacred geography is concerned, I think it's just an upcoming area that has been recently discovered by Caleb Simmons and a few other authors. But I don't think that can be a narrative on an international platform, because again sacred geography was not exclusive to India. Even Japanese did the same thing, even the Chinese did the same thing. But this is the interesting aspect of international law. All the post-colonial polities that gained their independence from colonialism accepted the Westphalian order, and we see an implicit acquiescence in international law as far as its ordering is concerned. So, could you repeat the first part of your question? I was not able to hear that.
Alok sir?
He's facing some network issues. So
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think.
Okay. We have Prashant sir and Rakesh Chandra sir. So please give your feedback and your comments on this. Rakesh Chandra sir is very well, a very good scholar of aesthetics. Sir, in Natya Shastra, how we take this theme of sublime?
sir, kindly unmute yourselves.
So you are
Please
muted.
unmute yourself.
So you are muted.
शिप्रा जी आप अनम्यूट कर दीजिए, आप को होस्ट हैं, आप कर दें।
हो नहीं रहा है यहाँ से। यहाँ से नहीं हो रहा है। राकेश से अनम्यूट कर दीजिए सर। राज सर आप कर दीजिए। राज सर
हो गया उनका, पर आवाज नहीं आ रही है।
अच्छा, आवाज नहीं आ रही। ओके,
नहीं मेरी तरफ से
आ गया। हाँ
You're audible now, sir.
Yes sir, yes
You're
Can you
audible
hear
now.
me now?
Yes
sir.
sir.
Good evening, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Bhanu, for this very scholarly paper. And, I would not comment on the idea of Burke here, of sublimity, which Shipra wanted me to, because that's the area in which I think that Burke is actually giving a declarative definition. He's separating beauty from sublime and then saying that sublime should mean this, which is not the meaning given by Kant or by the ancients or whatever. But what I really want to understand from you is that when we talk about the mathematical model of geography, and when we talk about sacred geographies or investment of emotion in spaces, it is very well taken. And the whole idea of colonization in both ways is also invested on the part of the colonizer also with the idea of emotion, that I want to expand the crown. I want to be the savior of the black people. Right. So it's not just that the people who are being colonized their
Right, right.
sacred space is being invaded or infringed. Or the
Right.
part of the colonizer's own mission in his
Mhm.
own idea is also of the salvation message, that these are the
Right,
people who saved
right.
souls are not so saved, and therefore through Salvation Army I must try and save that. So the investment in terms of emotion and then giving it a dignity of sacredness is cuts both ways. On the part, and I would take even a smaller example in a domestic space. When a girl goes in marriage to a husband's house in India, then the difficulty is that she has this thing that, can she move out of the kitchen? Can she go to the drawing room where her father-in-law and other people are sitting and the others? So when we talk about allowance and disallowance in terms of spaces, women experience the constriction of space enormously. So when we talk about the larger romanticized space of the Hindus or the Muslims or the Indians and the others, the women within those folds also have these things, that what are the spaces in which you are allowed and what are the spaces in which you are not allowed, where are you allowed without a veil, where are you allowed with veil, etc. So that whole discussion of spaces and emotion and associations with that is very well taken. The difficulty is that when we start talking about international law and sovereignty, then the whole discourse tries to attain a certain kind of a minimality rather than a maximality. And there you try and reduce it only to what are the minimum standards of sovereignty that you can attach to a whole, which is abstracted out either as a nation or as a state or as an individual. So when human rights discourse, it is at the level of the individual. In terms of the other discourses of sovereignty, it is at that level. So that discourse, instead of being, you can't accuse it of blindness. It is a deliberation. It is a deliberation which has been arrived at by reducing itself to minimalities so that you can have a discourse. So how can you have a talk between Iran and Ukraine and Greenland and Donald Trump? It cannot be in terms of sacred spaces. It cannot be in terms of emotional investment. It will have to be only in that. So that's one point which I want to bring. And the third thing is that a certain we are actually seem to be right now in the past 30, 40 years where the cultural studies has come, we seem to be facing a Hobson's choice in terms of a dilemma. On the one hand, we want a minimum common humanity of all to be recognized with dignity. On the other hand, we are also wanting that each space must have its certain kind of an integrity wherein it is non-negotiable. Now, that minimal space of human dignity is sometimes at the cost of this identity as an Iranian veiled woman or a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew. So I'm not saying you either have this or that. The point is, how can you have both? Because at the level of international law, we are saying, and you are a good scholar of that, from Kant onwards, we are trying to take a very minimal kind of a stand. And I think that minimality of the thing which is so strongly condemned and contested by the cultural studies people is actually something which they are not able to appreciate. Without that minimality, you will not be able to have what you want.
Right.
So I have this kind of a very, very difficult kind of situation, both as an activist with women and people and as an Indian, as well as a theoretician who's more inclined to believe that though the Enlightenment tradition was used to subjugate people hypocritically, yet that has the seeds of minimum universality, which we desperately need, which did not exist with the ancient and which is again being countered by the postmoderns. So that's my long, convoluted story.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
And sir, so nice to see you after a long time, sir. Thank you for joining. And we'll take final comment from Balram Singh, sir. sir. Sir,
Is
can you
there something more left to be said? You really want me to say something?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Well, in that case, I'm just going to bring science. Of course, that's the only thing I know. There is a word sublimation in science. That might give you some idea. Subliminality and sublimation or sublimational will be interesting concept because you mentioned everything. What was sublime? How that the word sublime word comes or subliminal word comes from Greek, where you something that is underneath to reach the height, certain level of height. But in sublimation is very practical. You know that there are three forms of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Gas is completely free. That's the highest, and then solid is not going anywhere. Liquid is where you create all these ideas of sovereignty or the international law. All these things is really created to make it palatable. So, and in sublimation, that is all gone. It's not there. Sublimation means solid from solid to gas. So it gives me people from being bound, completely bound, to completely free. And which is what I think the idea of India that you talked about, Calcutta and other things, how the people try to respond. I think part of it is because of that. I mean, like Bharat Mata, the idea of Bharat Mata, because women are very differently looked at in the Indian culture than in the Western culture. And they are really the basis of because we call them Dharti Mata. So Dharti is also known as Mata. So we know that the whole thing comes, finishing just Navratri is in my mind, that the whole idea. So they responded, but the response was very weak in not philosophical, in evolutionary ideas. When you respond and it's weak, then you lose and the other side becomes strong. So the response for you philosophers, young philosophers particularly, is very important to have very strong response in an alternative system. I'm just saying I'm using the sublimation because you were talking about sublime or subliminal. If we use the word where the freedom is something that is championed for the rest of the world, not just only for Indians, not only for one community or the other, not like that. It's just a universal and eternal principle. I think this will get popularity. I mean, this whole idea that you talked about is a very good analysis to say what happens if you don't do it. What I'm talking about, sublimational. If you do sublime, then this is where you end up. But if you do sublimation, which means you just get rid of all the liquid stuff in there, there's no doubt about that. So then, we might be able to do. So I think I get a very good idea from your discussion. And I might write something and I'll share with you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And I want to invite Prashant, sir, for his point of view and his comments on this.
Prashant is Prashant Mahasagar.
प्रशांत
सर प्रणाम सर
सर नहीं बोलेंगे तो फिर अधूरा रह जाएगा ये टॉक
Thank you, Bhanu sir. It was a very enriching session, particularly in can't sublime. सर जहां तक मैं समझता हूं कि जब क्रिटिक ऑफ जजमेंट में सबलाइम की बात होती है तो कांट asserts that sublime is not in nature but in the subject itself.
Right.
And second, it marks actually the reason of supremacy of reason over sensibility. कुछ लोग इसको शैलो डाउन कर देते हैं कि मतलब वो ग्रैंडियोर ऐसा होता है कि सेंसिबिलिटी सुपरसीड कर जाती है, बट एक्चुअली कांट मेंट दैट इट स्टिल represents the supremacy of reason itself.
Right.
And if so, he produces a sort of negative pleasure. So it is a feeling of elevation towards the failure of imagination. कि कोई भी चीज
Right.
इतनी बड़ी हो सकती है कि मेरी imagination से भी ज्यादा बड़ी हो जाए. So that is a feeling of awe, which cannot be compared with any other thing. So we can say that the Kantian sublime is some sort of transcendentalism as well as formalism. But I am always afraid कि जब हम लोग पोस्ट मॉडर्न लेंस से देखने की कोशिश करते हैं, then there are some problems, because the postmoderns, particularly critical theories like Adorno and Horkheimer, they try to make it more nuanced by giving it an understanding from the historical lens. लेकिन प्रॉब्लम ये है, ट्रांसेंडेंटलिज्म और हिस्टोरिसिटी, दे कैनॉट गो टुगेदर. So you can either take one of them but not both. तो मुझको लगता है कि जो पोस्ट मॉडर्न इसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन कर रहे हैं, that is a flawed one. I mean, Chandra sir is the best person to comment, but still आप लोग के कमेंट मुझको बहुत मैटर करते हैं, सर. सर आपके रिमार्क चाहिए?
Yeah. No, I think Bhanu should respond to this question.
Right.
Because this idea of, again, the transcendentalism in case of Kant, as you rightly pointed out, that more often than not, Kant's unique meaning of transcendent is actually the very condition of experience, as it were. And so that very condition of experience that he has in critique, and as Prashant rightly put it, and I think Bhanuji also put it, that in Kant, the idea is of something larger, inspiring awe, and being part of the subject. But when you come to Burke, it is clear that Burke is actually stipulating a difference between beauty and sublimity, where he says that sublime is not the beautiful. In case of Kant, sublime is over the beautiful and larger than that, but it does not necessarily negate the beauty. In case of Burke, it negates the beauty and takes the darker side. And therefore, when we are scholarly looking at that idea of sublimity, it becomes a little difficult. And I was actually thinking that when you put it as a part of the initial discourse, which Bhanu was trying to bring us to, the idea of colonial cartography, and in that, relating it to the of emotional investment of the people and the idea of sovereignty, there are many concepts which are closely related to each other, and wherein I think that the Enlightenment ideas were a little cleaner, though of course when you clean, then you of course miss out, as Prashant was saying, many of the nuances. But when you are talking of an international order, then of course you have to first bring people to the table on broad parameters, and then you can take the specifics of the nuances of the individual people and individual nations and their investment in terms of their understanding of sublimity, of their understanding of sacred, and their emotional investment in what they call space. Because as you rightly said, that the idea of time is variously conceived. In the Indian order of a certain kind, it is cyclical. In certain understanding, it does not exist at all. And so now those kind of metaphysical ideas cannot actually be put into the part of international negotiation, because international negotiation would take the minimum standards of pragmatic communicability in a subjective space.
To Prashant's query, I would like to point out that as far as international law is concerned, I think international law has produced three narratives that are, I mean, even as we speak today, they are irreversible. That is the proprietary nature of the world as interpreted through Roman law, the Westphalian system, and the Bretton Woods system. We take away any one of these things, the international order will cease to exist. Now, it is in this context that we have to understand the idea of sublime and the focus being shifted towards the human consciousness. Because what happens in international law, the primary cognition of international law is dependent on its sources, that is custom, treaties, general principles of law followed by civilized nation, and the works of the jurist and the judgments of ICJ. Now, the problem with this method of cognition of international law is that it makes international law very much a formalist affair, and it divorces people's attachment with international law. So what the new cognitive turn is trying to do, as we see in the work of Valentine Huttner and even Timothy Wong, what they're trying to say that they're trying to make international law a narrative of social consciousness. So international law is not limited to speciality. It is not limited to jurisdiction or abstract concepts, because ultimately there's a narrative. Ultimately, international law and law in general is about individual, but how to make that narrative successful. So it is only after 2014, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the present situation in Gaza, that we are witnessing new cognitive turns. And even, I'll use this platform to say, most of these new cognitive turns do not have a sound philosophical grounding to them. So when if there's this project called International Law and Objects, spearheaded by Valentine Huttner, so they use objects to introduce international law to the students, but they are not using the grounding of sublime. They are not using the grounding of emotions. So that's something that I wanted to supplement to it.
Thank you so much, sir. And the comments and feedbacks from the scholars and academicians like Chandra sir, Balram sir, and Prashant sir, Alok Tandon sir, matters a lot. And I would like to say Dr. Bhanu's talk has forced us to think whether international law is just for law, or is it something that should be thought of from the perspective of humanity. And the crisis of international law is not merely institutional, but it's epistemic. So we have many great academicians who had joined us here. I would like to thank all of them, all the audience, and many thanks to Dr. Bhanu for this wonderful talk. And
it's always a pleasure, ma'am. It's always a pleasure to be in the presence of such leading scholars of our time. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you all. And yes, we will meet. We'll meet in the next month with new speaker and new theme, new topic. Till then, namaste. Thank you.
Thank you so much.